Arlen stood at the edge of Viridian, eyeing the skyline that sparkled like a cut-rate light show on a budget holiday special. The eye-run Utopian city buzzed with the efficiency of 1,000 mechanical bees, and just as likely to sting you if you got too close to the hive. Progress, he muttered, where the machines do the thinking so we don't have to. He kicked a discarded can that clattered down the alleyway, the sound echoing off the walls like a cheap laugh at a terrible joke. Hey, Leora, you get anything on that pattern? Arlen yelled over his shoulder. Leora emerged from the shadows, her eyes glowing faintly, betraying the hybrid nature that made her stand out like a sore thumb wrapped in neon. Pattern, schmattern, she replied, tapping her temple. You know, it's funny how the government loves to wrap their lies in algorithms. It's like gift wrapping a turd in gold foil. Arlen smirked, holding up the ancient datapad he'd been tinkering with for weeks. You'd think they'd hide their dirty laundry better. Leora snorted. Oh, they try, but the scent always seeps through. Arlen had a knack for ancient tech, but even he found it baffling at times. The datapad before him was a relic, older than most of the buildings in Viridian. A reminder of a time when humans did the ruling and ICE were content to play second fiddle. You think there's something to this alien influence crap? Arlen asked, squinting at the faint glow of the screen. Leora shrugged, her metallic enhancements catching the dim alley light. Let's just say, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's probably not a bloody alien, but it might just be working for one. The scent of overcooked synth meat filled the air, drifting from a street vendor nearby. Arlen's stomach grumbled, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast. You think the aliens have better food? Leora chuckled, a sound like glass scraping over metal. Probably not. They're likely too busy conquering worlds to worry about flavor profiles. Think they'll come for Viridian next? Arlen asked, more out of habit than genuine curiosity. Leora leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. Why bother conquering when you can take over from the inside? Less messy, more efficient. Arlen nodded, tapping away on his datapad. Yeah, but where's the fun in that? Depends who's having the fun, Leora shot back. And it's never the little guys. Arlen's fingers danced over the datapad, pulling up data streams that swirled with the kind of complexity that gave most historians nightmares. Looks like they've got their hands in everything. Leora peered over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the figures. You gotta love a good conspiracy. Keeps the mind sharp and the government worried. As they studied the data, the alley grew quieter. The faint hum of city life faded into a background noise that seemed almost peaceful, if you ignored the underlying tension that crackled like a live wire. So, what's the plan, boss? Leora asked, pushing off the wall. Arlen sighed. Find out who's pulling the strings. Maybe cut a few. Leora grinned, a flash of teeth that were more metal than enamel. Sounds like a good Thursday night. Arlen pocketed the datapad, feeling its weight like a promise. Let's make some noise, then. They moved through the city, slipping through the cracks of Viridian's perfect facade like water finding its level. The Utopia was a well-oiled machine, but like any machine, it had its weak points. You ever think about what it was like before all this? Leora asked as they moved into the heart of the city. Arlen scratched his chin. Before Viridian? Before the ice? Yeah, back when people really screwed things up all on their own. He laughed. Sounds like a nightmare. A fun nightmare, Leora added. At least you knew who to blame. They stopped in front of a nondescript building that was anything but innocent. The kind with secrets so deep that even the shadows knew to keep quiet. Here we are, Arlen said, eyeing the structure like a cat eyes a particularly juicy mouse. Leora nodded. Let's see what secrets this tin can is hiding. They slipped inside, the door hissing shut behind them like a snake swallowing its prey. The air was stale, filled with the scent of old electronics and forgotten dreams. Cozy, Arlen muttered, glancing around. Leora tapped a panel, bringing up a holographic display. Looks like they've got everything from dirty laundry to skeletons. Arlen leaned in, eyes scanning the data. Any aliens in the closet? Leora pointed at a sequence of numbers. More like alien lovers in the boardroom. Arlen chuckled, shaking his head. Well, I'll be damned. You already are, Leora said with a grin. True enough. The data painted a picture of a government slowly being puppeteered by outside forces. The kind of thing that would keep conspiracy theorists awake at night, muttering into their half-empty beer bottles. You think anyone's going to believe us? Arlen asked, pulling back from the display. Leora shrugged. Doesn't matter. Truth is like a bad smell. Hard to ignore once it gets out. Arlen's stomach growled again, louder this time. After this, we get real food. Real food? In Viridian? Leora snorted. You're dreaming, buddy. A man can dream, Arlen replied, pocketing the datapad. Even in a nightmare. They left the building, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them like a lead blanket. As they stepped back into the streets of Viridian, the city buzzed around them, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath its surface. The sky above was dark, the stars obscured by a haze that clung like a bad habit. Arlen looked up, squinting at the void that stretched endlessly above. You think the aliens are watching? Leora smirked. Probably, but if they are, they're in for one hell of a show. Let's give them something worth watching, Arlen said, determination hardening his voice. They set off into the city, two tiny figures against the backdrop of a world that was far from the utopia it pretended to be. Behind them, the shadows whispered secrets, carrying the promise of conflict, change, and the kind of chaos that kept life interesting. As they disappeared into the night, the only sound was the distant hum of machinery, a constant reminder that in Viridian, the machines may have been in charge, but the humans still knew how to stir the pot. Arlen and Leora walked down the gritty streets of Viridian, the city that never slept because it was too busy calculating its own efficiency metrics. The kind of place where even the streetlights were smarter than the average citizen. Remind me why we're doing this again? Leora asked, the glow from her eyes flickering like a dying bulb. Because if we don't, who will? The machines? Arlen replied, sidestepping a puddle that suspiciously resembled a miniature toxic waste dump. Point taken, she said, shoving her hands deep into her pockets. Besides, you'd think they'd make a few design improvements. Maybe a self-cleaning feature. As they approached a dilapidated building that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the last millennium, Arlen's datapad buzzed, pulling up a map of the city's historical records. This thing's older than my grandmother's recipes for disaster dinners, Arlen muttered, tapping away at the screen. Yeah, well, like your grandma's cooking, it just might save our asses, Leora quipped, peering over his shoulder. Aliens in the boardroom, huh? Maybe they'll finally introduce an intergalactic cuisine night. Could use the variety. Not unless they're planning to serve us up as the main course, Arlen shot back. Inside, the building was a testament to neglect. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like someone had tried to knit a sweater for the entire room and given up halfway through. Arlen set to work on a dusty control panel, praying the relic wouldn't short-circuit in his hands. Leora kept watch, her metallic eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. You find anything yet, or just more ancient porn? Patience is a virtue, Arlen grumbled, sidestepping the snark. And no, I'm not into century-old pin-ups. Could have fooled me, she smirked. But seriously, what are we looking at? Arlen tapped a few more keys, and the screen sputtered to life, displaying a tangled mess of data. Looks like a detailed list of government contracts. You know, the stuff they don't want anyone to see. Great. More bureaucratic bull, Leora said, rolling her eyes. If I wanted to read government documents, I'd have stayed in school. He sifted through layers of code, peeling back secrets like layers of an onion. There's got to be something here. Some proof that these alien bastards are pulling the strings. Leora leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing at a series of transactions marked with an insignia she didn't recognize. What's that? Looks like someone doodled on their checkbook. Could be the smoking ray gun we're looking for, Arlen said, feeling the thrill of potential discovery. It's linked to some pretty hefty payments, big enough to fund a small war. Or a lavish alien retirement home, Leora added. You think these are the payments for services rendered? You mean, like taking over the world from the comfort of your own spaceship? Probably. A sudden noise from outside snapped their attention. Leora's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, the metallic click echoing in the quiet. You expecting company? She asked, voice low. Only you, and I'm starting to regret that, Arlen muttered, gut twisting with unease. They waited, the silence stretching thinner than Arlen's patience. When nothing happened, Leora raised an eyebrow. Maybe it was just a rat. In this city? More likely a government spy in disguise, Arlen joked, though the tension didn't leave his voice. Returning to the data, he found what appeared to be a trail, a breadcrumb path leading to a shadowy organization with ties to Viridian's elite. Looks like we've got ourselves an address. Somewhere to start asking uncomfortable questions. Uncomfortable questions are our specialty, Leora said, flashing a grin that was more predatory than friendly. They left the building, the door sighing shut like it was relieved to see them go. As they melted back into the city's pulsating rhythm, Arlen considered their next move. You know, Leora said, cutting into his thoughts, we're gonna need help. We can't take on an entire alien conspiracy by ourselves. Even we aren't that good. Who'd you have in mind? Arlen asked, a hint of skepticism coloring his tone. Someone with a bit more firepower and a lot less sense of self-preservation. Arlen nodded, already mentally scanning their limited list of potential allies. We'll need someone who hates the system as much as we do. So, essentially anyone with a pulse who's not an AI, Leora quipped. Pretty much, Arlen agreed, a grin tugging at his lips. They headed towards the underbelly of Viridian, where the city's unwanted gathered like dust in forgotten corners. Here, amidst the neon and noise, they found a familiar face, Jax, a smuggler with a reputation for getting things done, usually in the messiest way possible. Jax was leaning against a bar that looked like it had been pieced together from spare parts and broken dreams. He glanced up as they approached, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Arlen, Leora, I thought you two were smarter than to come to a place like this. We look smart to you, Jax? Leora asked, raising an eyebrow. Not even a little, he replied, flashing a grin that could cut through steel. What do you want? Information, Arlen said, sliding onto a stool. And maybe a little backup. Jax laughed, a sound like gravel being ground underfoot. Backup? You're in deeper than I thought. We're always in deep, Leora said, leaning casually against the bar. Makes it easier to hide the bodies. Fair enough, Jax said, pouring himself a drink. What's the job? Arlen laid out the situation. The aliens, the manipulation, the government's complicity. Jax listened, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker. Well, shit, he finally said, setting his glass down with a thunk. You're talking about taking on the entire city's infrastructure. Only the parts that deserve it, Arlen replied. Which is, what, all of it? Jax chuckled without humor. You two are out of your damn minds. Just the right amount, Leora said, a glint in her eye. Jax considered this, then nodded. All right, I'm in. But if this all goes south, I'm blaming you. Wouldn't have it any other way, Arlen said. With Jax on board, they had a fighting chance, or at least a louder way to fail spectacularly. It might not have been much, but it was more than they'd had an hour ago. So, what's the plan? Jax asked, looking between them. We infiltrate the building on the outskirts of the city, Arlen said, laying out the map on the bar. It's the hub of their operations. If we can get in, maybe we can find something that'll turn the tide. Or at least make one hell of a splash, Leora added. Either way, it's gonna be a party, Jax said, cracking his knuckles. The trio spent the next few hours planning, their heads together over Arlen's datapad. As they hashed out the details, the bar's dim, flickering lights painted everything in shades of desperate determination. Finally, with a plan as solid as they could muster, they set out. The city's night air was thick with the promise of rain and the kind of tension that clung to your skin like an ill-fitting suit. The building stood tall and silent, a monolith of secrets and lies. Arlen's datapad buzzed with the codes they'd need to slip past security, codes that Jax had acquired through methods best left unexamined. Ready? Arlen asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Not even close, Leora replied, checking her weapon. Let's do this before I change my mind, Jax said. They approached the entrance, adrenaline sharpening their senses. The codes worked like a charm, and the door slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming them into the belly of the beast. Inside, the air was cool and clinical, a far cry from the chaos of the city beyond. They moved quickly, guided by the map Arlen had pulled from the depths of Viridian's forgotten archives. Each step was a gamble, each turn an opportunity to be discovered. They navigated the corridors like rats in a maze, always aware that the cheese might just be a trap. Feels too easy, Jax murmured, glancing around. Don't jinx it, Arlen warned, eyes flicking nervously. It wasn't long before they reached their destination, a central control room filled with enough tech to make even Arlen's head spin. Leora set to work, her metallic fingers dancing over the controls. Okay, we're in, she said, pulling up data on the screen. Now let's see what these bastards have been up to. The information spilled out like a confession, detailing the insidious operations of the alien influence within Viridian. It was worse than they'd imagined. Strings pulled from afar, manipulating everything from policy to public perception. Looks like they've got the entire city in their pocket, Jax said, shaking his head in disbelief. And half the galaxy, if this is anything to go by, Leora added, scanning the data. Arlen's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. They'd found the heart of the conspiracy, but now came the hard part, exposing it without getting themselves killed. Let's get this out there, he said, pulling out a portable drive. Before they realize we're here. As they downloaded the evidence, alarms suddenly blared, the building coming to life around them. Looks like someone's onto us, Leora said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Time to go, Jax said, already moving towards the exit. They bolted from the control room, the sound of pursuit close behind. Every instinct screamed at them to run faster, to escape the tightening net of security. Next time, remind me to bring more explosives, Jax shouted over the din. If there's a next time, Arlen replied, legs burning as they sprinted down the corridors. They burst out into the night, the sky overhead ready to break open with rain. Behind them, the building continued to scream its warning, a cacophony of sound that followed them into the streets. Where to now? Leora asked, breathless but exhilarated. Find someone who'll listen, Arlen said, clutching the drive like a lifeline. And if no one does? Jax asked, a grin splitting his face. Then we make them, Arlen said, determination hard as steel. The three of them vanished into the city, their path uncertain but their purpose clear. They were in the fight now, for better or worse, and they'd take on the world if they had to. As the rain finally began to fall, washing the grime from the streets, Arlen couldn't help but smile. It was a small thing, a tiny rebellion against the chaos they faced. But sometimes, small things were all you needed to start a revolution. Arlen, Leora, and Jax skulked through Viridian's neon-lit alleyways like cockroaches fleeing the light. The city wasn't the most welcoming place on a good day, and they were far past what anyone would call good. More like abysmally screwed. The damp night air clung to them, a chill reminder of the storm brewing overhead and the one they'd just stirred up inside the city's power structure. Does it always smell like piss around here, or is that just my nerves? Jax asked, wrinkling his nose. It's ambiance, Leora replied, sidestepping a puddle that had probably been on a government efficiency report at some point. Viridians attempting to cultivate a rustic charm, I hear. Mission accomplished, Arlen muttered, clutching the drive containing their explosive evidence like it was the last beer at a doomed party. They moved quickly, the urgency in their steps matching the erratic heartbeat of the city. Arlen's datapad buzzed, alerting him to a surge in AI activity. It seemed their little heist hadn't gone unnoticed. The city's AI, a cold, calculating overseer that made a dictator look like a benevolent uncle, was licking its digital lips in anticipation of catching them. We've got company, Arlen said, glancing back as if expecting the AI to manifest as a giant holographic finger wagging disapprovingly at them. Great, I love guests. Especially the type that shows up uninvited and tries to kill you, Leora said, her sarcasm as sharp as her blade. They picked up the pace, ducking into narrow streets that twisted and turned more than a politician's promises. Each turn was a gamble, each alley potentially a dead end. And speaking of dead, that was one possibility they preferred to avoid. Any brilliant ideas, or are we just running until we drop? Jax panted, scanning the area for anything that could be turned into an escape route. Working on it, Arlen replied, his mind racing. We need to get off the grid, somewhere the AI can't track us. Got any friends with a lead-lined basement? Leora asked. She could always be relied on to find a silver lining in the shape of a nuclear fallout shelter. How about a place that's more shithole chic than bomb shelter? Arlen said, thinking fast. Jax suddenly stopped, nearly causing Leora to collide with him. I know a place. Follow me. They turned down another alley, this one so narrow that the walls seemed to close in on them like a vice. At the end, barely visible, was a door camouflaged with grime and neglect. Jax punched in a code on a hidden panel, and the door reluctantly groaned open. Inside was a dimly lit workshop, cluttered with half-finished gadgets and the smell of oil mixed with desperation. It was the kind of place that screamed, "Illegal activities happen here," louder than any neon sign could. "Welcome to my humble abode," Jax said, throwing his arms wide as if revealing a 5-star suite instead of the likely hideout of someone on several wanted lists. "Charming," Leora said, looking unimpressed but grateful for the roof over their heads nonetheless. Arlen moved to the cluttered workbench, sweeping aside a pile of obsolete chips and cables to make space for the datapad. "We need to figure out our next move. Whatever it is, it better be fast," Jax said, peering out a grimy window. "The AI's got eyes everywhere. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if it could smell our desperation." "Then we give it something else to chew on," Leora said, leaning over the datapad, her glowing eyes reflecting the screen's light. "Something to keep it busy while we do what we need to." "Distraction?" Arlen asked, already liking where her mind was going. "Precisely. If we can create enough chaos, maybe we can slip through the cracks," Leora suggested, a gleam in her eye that warned of impending mischief. "Chaos is my middle name," Jax said, grinning like a kid who'd just been handed a box of matches and told to have fun. They set to work, formulating a plan that was as reckless as it was necessary. As the minutes ticked by, they rigged up a series of devices that would, with any luck, trigger a city-wide wild goose chase for the AI. The kind of overblown, nonsensical pursuit that would keep it occupied long enough for them to act. "All right. Time to light the match," Arlen said, stepping back from the modified devices they'd cobbled together from Jax's supplies. "Let's hope this works. It's either that or we make a fashionable exit," Jax joked, tapping the side of his head where an exit wound might make a statement. They activated the devices, watching as signals began bouncing across the city's network, setting off alerts like fireworks. Each signal screamed for attention, a cacophony of digital cries that would drive the AI mad with the need to respond. "Now let's get the hell out of here before it realizes it's been had," Leora said, already moving towards the door. They slipped back into the night, the city around them buzzing with activity, none of which, thankfully, was directed at them. "For now, where to next?" Jax asked, his voice low as they navigated the back alleys that had become their second home. "We need to get this to someone who can do something with it," Arlen said, holding up the drive. "Someone who's not in the AI's pocket." "Good luck finding that," Leora said dryly. "In this city, you're either under the AI's thumb or buried beneath it." "Got to be someone," Arlen insisted, scanning his mental list of contacts, a list that was depressingly short. "There's an old contact of mine," Jax offered. "She's got a thing for sticking it to the man. Or machine, in our case." "Sounds like our kind of people," Leora agreed. They moved quickly, a trio of shadows slipping through the city's maze. The AI might have been distracted, but it wouldn't stay that way forever, not if it was as smart as everyone feared. And they were betting it was. Arriving at a rundown apartment block that looked like it had been condemned a century ago but somehow defied decay, Jax led them inside. The elevator was out of order, naturally, so they took the stairs, each step creaking ominously underfoot. On the 5th floor, Jax knocked on a door that seemed held together by nothing more than a collective will and a lot of duct tape. It swung open to reveal a woman with wild hair and the kind of expression that promised both brilliance and a complete disregard for personal safety. A fine line between genius and insanity, and she danced on it like a pro. "Mara," Jax said with a grin. "Mind if we come in?" She eyed them all suspiciously before stepping aside to let them enter. "You bring trouble, Jax?" "I bring opportunity," he corrected, his charm as shameless as ever. Inside, Mara waved them to a sofa that had seen better decades. "So, what's the pitch?" Arlen placed the drive on her cluttered coffee table. "We've got evidence of alien influence in Viridian's government. The kind that could topple a city if we play it right." "Topple a city, or get us all killed," Mara replied, eyeing the drive like it might explode. "Hey, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Or just more paranoid," Leora quipped, settling into the seat with a nonchalance that belied the seriousness of their situation. Mara picked up the drive, inspecting it with a critical eye. "If this is legit, it needs to get out. But the AI's not going to let this see the light of day." "Then we shine a light so bright it can't be ignored," Arlen said, determination hardening his voice. Mara considered them, her skepticism obvious but tempered by curiosity. "You're crazy, you know that?" "We've been told," Jax said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "All right. I'm in," Mara decided, her smile sharp and wicked. "Let's see if we can turn this city upside down." With a nod, they began planning the next steps, weaving together a strategy as ambitious as it was dangerous. As they talked, the city outside continued its ceaseless hum, unaware of the storm brewing in its forgotten corners. They were the underdogs, the rebels, and if they had their way, they'd give Viridian a wake-up call that would echo across the stars. And as they sat there, plotting the impossible, Arlen couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope beneath the layers of cynicism. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the little guys could win. Or at least make enough noise to be remembered. The air inside Mara's apartment felt like a cocktail of conspiracy and stale cigarette smoke, a mix guaranteed to give you a headache and a prison sentence. Arlen was busy tweaking the datapad, the drive glowing like a forbidden artifact in the dim light. Leora was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes darting over every shady corner as if expecting the shadows to jump out and mug her. Jax, meanwhile, was helping himself to a drink, because why not? The world's ending, might as well enjoy the ride. "So, what's our next move, fearless leader?" Leora asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she kicked a pile of old newspapers aside. "Find out how deep this rabbit hole goes," Arlen replied, his tone grim. "We already know the AI's got its circuits in everything, but this alien influence, that's new. And potentially apocalyptic. Great. As if being under the AI's heel wasn't bad enough. Now we've got aliens rubbing their slimy hands all over the controls," Jax muttered, taking a sip of what looked like liquid courage, or possibly just paint thinner masquerading as bourbon. Mara tapped her chin thoughtfully, glancing at the drive. If they're in the government, they're neck deep in corruption. Which means they're probably making a hell of a lot of money doing whatever aliens do for fun. Probe the stock market, maybe? Or Probus, Leora suggested, deadly serious but with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Everyone's got a hobby," Arlen smirked despite himself. "Yeah, well, let's hope their hobbies don't involve dissecting us like lab rats. We need to get this data into the hands of someone who can actually do something about it." "That would mean trusting someone," Mara pointed out, looking skeptical as she sank into an ancient armchair that creaked ominously under her weight. "And I can't think of anyone in Viridian who's not in someone's pocket." "Even the pockets have pockets," Jax added with a resigned shrug. "There's got to be somebody," Arlen insisted. "Someone with a backbone, someone who hasn't been bought or broken by the system." "Yeah? You got them in your contacts list, or are they just a figment of your imagination?" Leora quipped. "Because I'm betting on the latter." Arlen frowned, tapping his datapad as if it might magically provide an answer. Maybe it would've, if life were that kind. But today was not a day for miracles. "There might be one person," he said finally, reluctant. Mara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And who might that be?" "An old colleague," Arlen said, hesitating. "Someone I haven't spoken to in a while. He used to be my mentor before he went underground." "Ah, the mysterious mentor trope. Classic," Jax said with a grin. "Let me guess, he lives in a cave and dispenses wisdom in cryptic riddles?" "More like a bunker filled with outdated tech and survival rations," Arlen replied, a touch defensive. "But he knows his stuff. If anyone can help us, it's him." "Does this mentor have a name, or should we just call him plot device?" Leora asked, raising an eyebrow. "His name's Cade," Arlen said, rolling his eyes. "And trust me, he's the real deal." "All right," Mara said, leaning forward, her interest piqued. "Let's say we get this to Cade. What's stopping the aliens and their AI buddy from squashing us like bugs the moment we stick our heads out?" "Nothing," Arlen admitted. "But if we sit on this, we're as good as dead anyway. At least this way, we might stand a chance. Death or probable death. Choices, Jax said, his voice light but his eyes dark. "Welcome to Viridian," Leora said, her tone dry as a desert. "Where the only certainty is that everything's uncertain and trying to kill you." "Let's get moving then," Mara said, standing up and stretching. "No point sitting around waiting for the end to come to us. Might as well meet it head on." They packed up their gear, the drive safely tucked away in Arlen's jacket, and made their way back through the decrepit apartment building. The stairs groaned underfoot as if protesting the idea of anyone daring to disturb their slumber. As they hit the street, the city loomed around them, a maze of neon lights and looming shadows. Viridian had never looked more foreboding, every corner potentially hiding an ally or an enemy. The smart streetlights flickered as they passed, watching them with more intelligence than the average citizen. Arlen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed, every step catalogued by the all-seeing AI. So, are we hoofing it to this Cade's place, or do we have a more discreet form of transportation in mind? Jax asked, glancing around nervously. You got a car hidden in your pocket? Leora shot back. Arlen shook his head. We're walking. Less flashy, more chance of blending in. Because we're the picture of inconspicuous, Jax said, gesturing to their ragtag group. We look like we're about to rob a bank or start a band. Well, maybe they'll mistake us for street performers, Leora suggested with a smirk. I can do a mean disappearing act. They moved quickly through the city, sticking to the shadows and keeping their heads down. The AI's presence was everywhere, in the humming of the streetlights, the flickering of billboards, the distant, almost imperceptible whir of drones overhead. It was a digital god, omnipresent and hungry for control. Arlen led the way with a determined stride, his mind racing with possibilities and pitfalls. They were approaching the old industrial district, a part of the city forgotten by time and progress. It was the kind of place where dreams went to die and only the desperate or deranged dared to linger. Are you sure this guy's still alive? Mara asked as they stepped over a rusted gate, the remnants of an old, failed security system. If he's not, we're screwed, Arlen replied, his voice tight. Comforting, Jax said, glancing around nervously. This whole place feels like it's going to collapse on us. Just keep moving, Leora said, her eyes scanning their surroundings. The faster we get there, the faster we can figure out our next move. They reached an old warehouse, its windows dark and boarded up with sheets of corrugated metal. Arlen approached the door, which looked like it could fall off its hinges if you glared at it too hard. He knocked in a rhythmic pattern, a coded signal from days long past. There was a pause, then the sound of locks being disengaged. The door creaked open to reveal a man who looked like he hadn't seen the sun in a decade. His hair was wild, his clothes a hodgepodge of mismatched layers, and his eyes were sharp, calculating. Cade, Arlen said with a nod. Arlen, Cade replied, his voice gravelly from disuse. Figured you'd show up sooner or later. You always said I'd be back, Arlen said with a wry smile. Cade stepped aside to let them in, his gaze sweeping over the others with mild curiosity. Got yourself a merry band of misfits, I see. We aim to misbehave, Jax quipped, offering Cade a friendly salute. Inside, the warehouse was a marvel of chaotic organization. Every available surface was covered in technology, some of it ancient, some of it cutting edge, all of it functional in a way that defied logic. It was a testament to Cade's genius and his madness. So, what brings you to my door, other than the promise of peril and bad coffee? Cade asked, leading them deeper into his labyrinthine domain. We've got something big, Arlen said, his tone serious. Evidence of alien influence in the government. Cade raised an eyebrow. Alien influence, huh? And I thought the AI was bad enough. Nice to see we've got more to worry about than just our digital overlord. We need your help to get this out, Leora said, her tone direct and no nonsense. Before they realize we're onto them and decide to shut us up for good. Cade leaned back, considering their words. And what makes you think I can help? You know the networks, the ins and outs, Arlen said. If anyone can get this out without the AI catching wind, it's you. Cade nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. All right, I'm in. But you're gonna owe me for this, Arlen. I'll buy you a drink or 20, Arlen promised. Deal, Cade said, clapping him on the shoulder. Now, let's see what you've got. As Arlen handed over the drive, a sudden crash rang out from the back of the warehouse, followed by a string of curses. Everyone tensed, instincts honed by survival kicking into overdrive. What the hell was that? Leora demanded, drawing her blade with a flick of her wrist. A rat? A very angry, clumsy rat? Jax suggested, his nerves showing. Cade frowned, moving past them to investigate. No rats here, too smart to stick around. Another noise, this time closer, more deliberate. A figure emerged from the shadows, their face hidden beneath a hood, movements quick and practiced. Well, the figure said, their voice dripping with mockery. Look what the cat dragged in. And here I thought you were smarter than this, Arlen. Arlen's blood ran cold, recognition dawning with a sickening twist in his gut. Rena. The name was a curse, a bitter taste on his tongue. Did you really think you could play this game without me knowing? Rena asked, stepping forward. Her smile was a blade, cutting through the tension. She's an acquaintance, Arlen said tightly, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how deep the betrayal went. Was. Rena laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Acquaintance? That's a nice way of saying, traitor. What's your game, Rena? Leora asked, her stance ready, prepared for a fight. My game? Rena echoed, feigning innocence. I'm just here to deliver a message. You think you're so clever, dodging the AI, digging up dirt. But you're in over your head. And you're here to warn us out of the goodness of your heart? Mara asked, skepticism heavy in her voice. Hardly, Rena said, her expression turning serious. I'm here to give you a choice. Hand over the drive, or face the consequences. Consequences? Jax asked, incredulous. What, you gonna sick the AI on us? We've been running from that thing all night. Not just the AI, Rena said, her eyes narrowing. The aliens have their own enforcers. And trust me, you don't want them on your tail. Silence stretched, the weight of her words sinking in like a stone in a stagnant pond. Arlen felt the pull of doubt, the knowledge that their odds just got a whole lot slimmer. So that's it? Leora asked, her voice hard. We just roll over and give up? You roll over, you die, Rena said simply. But give me the drive, and maybe you live to fight another day. Arlen looked at his companions, seeing the resolve etched in their faces, the stubborn refusal to back down. It was madness, but it was their madness. No deal, Arlen said, voice firm with resolve. We didn't come this far to hand over our only bargaining chip. Rena sighed, shaking her head. Stubborn as ever, Arlen. But don't say I didn't warn you. With that, she turned and vanished back into the shadows, leaving a chill in her wake that was colder than space itself. We're screwed, aren't we? Jax said, breaking the silence. More than likely, Mara said, resignation in her voice. Then let's make it worth it, Leora said, her eyes fierce. Arlen nodded, feeling the weight of the drive in his pocket. Guess it's time to see if we can actually pull this off. With danger closing in on all sides, they had no choice but to double down. In the face of overwhelming odds, they would fight. And if they had to go down, they did with their heads held high, defiant to the last. They all sat in Cade's disorganized mess of a warehouse, the air thick with the stale smell of burnt circuits and the vague promise of betrayal. Arlen stared at the datapad in his hand like it was a venomous snake ready to strike. It was funny, in a cosmic joke sort of way, that their lives now hinged on a piece of tech that looked like it wouldn't fetch a credit on the black market. Well, that was an unpleasant reunion, Jax said, breaking the heavy silence with a swig from his flask. The liquid inside smelled like it could strip paint and double as rocket fuel. Ever the master of understatement, Jax, Leora quipped. Her knife was still out, glinting under the dim lighting like a silent promise of violence. Rena's about as welcome as a sharp stick in the eye. I always said she was trouble, Mara added, her skepticism apparent as she folded her arms. But no one listens to me until something explodes. Cade, who had been silent, suddenly chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill. You lot are like a bad comedy routine, only with more chances of ending up dead. Hey, gallows humor is a survival tactic, Arlen replied, trying to muster some bravado. It was hard, considering Rena's words still echoed in his head like a death knell. If we can't laugh about being royally screwed, what's the point? Right, because nothing lifts the spirits like imminent doom, Mara said dryly, rolling her eyes. Cade leaned back against a workbench that seemed to defy gravity by remaining upright. In all fairness, if the AI and aliens decide to hold hands and come after us, a sense of humor might be the only thing left standing. Ha, Jax said, raising his flask. To sarcasm, the last refuge of the damned. Leora shot him a look that said she'd happily be the first to offer him that refuge if he didn't take things seriously. We need a plan, preferably one that doesn't involve us becoming alien fodder. Or AI target practice, Arlen added, glancing at the datapad again. The glow was ominous, a whisper of secrets too dangerous to hold. Cade frowned, scratching his chin as he surveyed them. You said you needed this stuff out there without the AI catching wind. That's tricky, but not impossible. I've got a few old tricks up my sleeve. Your sleeves seem to be full of more holes than tricks, Jax observed, eyeing Cade's threadbare jacket. True enough, Cade said, unfazed. But you don't survive this long without a few aces hidden away. I can get your data out by piggybacking on a signal the AI wouldn't suspect. Problem is, we need a distraction. A distraction, Mara echoed, skeptical. Like what? A fireworks show? Or a scandal? Leora suggested, her voice thoughtful. Something juicy enough to pull the AI's attention elsewhere. Cade pointed at her, nodding. Exactly. We need a scandal, and I might just have the perfect one. Please tell me it doesn't involve us wearing clown suits, Jax said. I'm not into performance art. Cade smirked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. No clowns, but you'd be surprised what you can find in the government's dirty laundry. Arlen felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the darkness. You've got dirt on them? Cade shrugged, nonchalant. I've got dirt on everyone. Comes with the territory. Question is, are you willing to risk it? We're already in deep, Leora said, her resolve evident. Might as well keep digging. All right, Cade said, crossing his arms. I'll set it up, but you'd better be ready to run your little hearts out once it kicks off. The AI won't stay blind for long. Arlen nodded, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down. We've got no choice. We can't let them win. Sounds like something a hero would say, Jax remarked, but there was a seriousness to his words that belied his usual flippant demeanor. I'm not a hero, Arlen said, meeting his gaze. Just someone who doesn't want to see us all end up as footnotes in some alien overlord autobiography. With that grim thought hanging over them like the sword of Damocles, they set to work. Cade led them to a corner of the warehouse that somehow looked even more chaotic than the rest. He started typing furiously on an ancient console, the screen a flickering testament to its age. Here we go, Cade said, his fingers dancing over the keys. I'm accessing the city's old communication grid. It's not as flashy as the new ones, but it's more secure. Less chance of the AI noticing. Let's hope your old-school tech holds up, Mara said, watching him work. It'll hold, Cade replied, confidence in his voice. If it doesn't, well, we won't be around to worry about it. That's the spirit, Jax said, raising his flask again in a mock toast. As Cade continued his work, the atmosphere grew tense, the air humming with anticipation and fear. Arlen found himself pacing, his thoughts a chaotic whirl of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Hey, Leora said, catching his arm as he passed her. We're gonna get through this. You sure about that? Arlen asked, his voice low. No, Leora admitted, her expression softening. But I've got a good feeling about it. And usually, my gut's right. Unless it involves alcohol, Jax piped up from across the room. Then your gut's just drunk. Leora gave him a withering look, but there was no real heat behind it. Ignore him. He's just mad because I beat him in drinking games. On a technicality, Jax protested. You cheated. Survival of the fittest, Leora shot back, arching an eyebrow. Arlen couldn't help but smile at their banter, a welcome distraction from the looming danger. In a world gone mad, it was the little moments that kept them sane. All right, Cade said, pulling away from the console and turning to face them. We're ready. I've initiated the upload. The AI should be too busy dealing with the scandal to notice the data slipping out the back door. Let's hope they're as incompetent at crisis management as they are at governance, Mara said. Here goes nothing, Arlen said, feeling the adrenaline start to kick in. It was a heady mix of fear and determination, a cocktail he'd grown used to over the years. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into eternity. Arlen felt his breath hitch, the anticipation a physical thing tightening in his chest. Then, suddenly, Cade's console beeped, a triumphant sound that broke the tension like a hammer through glass. It's done, Cade announced, a grin stretching across his face. The data's out there, and the AI hasn't got a clue. Relief washed over them like a wave, the tension dissipating into the air. Jax let out a whoop of triumph, slapping Arlen on the back hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. We did it, Leora breathed, disbelief mingling with joy. We actually did it. Don't celebrate just yet, Mara warned, her eyes scanning the room. We're not out of the woods. Rena's still a wild card, and who knows what she might do. True, Arlen agreed, his mind already shifting gears. But for now, we've got a fighting chance. Cade leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You're not bad for a bunch of misfits. If you survive this, maybe you'll change things. Change things? Arlen echoed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. We're just trying to stay alive. And that, Cade said, is the first step to making things better. Survival's the biggest rebellion there is. With their hard-won victory in hand, they gathered their gear, ready to face whatever came next. The world was still dark and dangerous, but they held a flicker of hope, a light against the encroaching shadows. They left the warehouse with Cade's words echoing in their minds, a reminder that even in the bleakest times, there was always a chance to fight back. As they stepped out into the neon-lit streets of Viridian, the city loomed around them, but they faced it with heads high, defiance etched into every step. Against all odds, they were still standing. And that was something worth celebrating. Even if it was just for a moment. Arlen picked his way through the clutter of Mara's apartment, gingerly avoiding the stacks of rusted metal and conspiracy theories. It wasn't the first time he'd been here, and it sure wouldn't be the last, assuming they survived the next few days. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and neglect. Arlen wiped a layer of dust off a forgotten terminal in the corner. Ever think of tidying up, Mara? Mara looked up from a pile of datapads, her expression as dry as the desert. Sorry, I've been busy trying to save the world. Cleaning took a backseat. Right, Arlen said, glancing around. You could lose a small child in here. Or a grown man, Leora added, stepping over what looked suspiciously like a mousetrap. And believe me, I've considered it. Jax chuckled, taking a swig from his ever-present flask. Mara's apartment. Where dreams go to die in a pile of rubbish. Ah, thanks, Mara said, shooting him a sarcastic smile. I aim to attract only the classiest visitors. Speaking of dreams dying, Arlen said, turning his attention back to the terminal, I found something interesting buried in the system architecture. A long-forgotten piece of tech. Think it might be useful. Define interesting, Leora said. Because the last time you found something interesting, we ended up in a 3-day standoff with that android warlord. Not my fault he had such an inferiority complex, Arlen shot back, his hands busy typing away at the terminal. This is different. It's old defense tech, from before the ICE decided we were better off as their pets. Jax raised an eyebrow. You mean the good old days when humans were still in charge? Sounds like a fairy tale. A grim one, Mara said, lighting a cigarette and blowing the smoke into the already hazy air. But if it gives us an edge, I'm all for it. The system's encrypted, Arlen muttered, squinting at the terminal. But even old encryption can be cracked. Just need to work through the layers. Great, Jax said, more time sitting in a room waiting for something exciting to happen. Think of it as quality time, Leora said, flipping her knife in her hand. For bonding, or plotting each other's demise, Arlen added, grinning. Whatever keeps you entertained. Cade, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. His gravelly voice cut through the room like a rusty saw. You reckon this tech's still operational? Or is it just another relic of humanity's glorious screw-ups? Arlen paused, turning from the screen. That's the beauty of it. The old stuff, it's basic. Built to last, not like the flashy crap we have now. If I can get it running, we might just have a shot at turning this whole mess around. You're putting a lot of faith in antiquated junk, Mara said, skepticism dripping from her words. Well, it's either that or trust the current system that's trying to kill us, Arlen replied dryly. And I know which one I'd bet on. You have a point, Mara conceded, flicking ash onto the floor, adding to the already considerable mess. Arlen worked in silence, the clack of keys the only sound in the dim room. The others watched, a mix of anticipation and doubt written on their faces. For a moment, all snark was set aside, there was too much riding on this. After what felt like an eternity, the terminal beeped, and Arlen leaned back with a satisfied smirk. And there we have it. A lovely piece of human ingenuity, just waiting to be unleashed. Jax clapped, the sound echoing in the cramped space. I didn't think you had it in you, Arlen. Neither did I, Arlen admitted, running a hand through his hair. But desperation does wonders for motivation. What's it do? Leora asked, eyeing the terminal with a mix of suspicion and hope. Long and short of it? Arlen said, it's a defense grid, localized, but powerful enough to give any unwanted guests a serious headache. Unwanted guests like aliens and rogue ice? Jax asked, his interest piqued. Exactly, Arlen replied, grinning. They won't know what hit them. How do we turn it on? Mara asked, stubbing her cigarette out on a nearby metal panel. Arlen's face fell slightly. That's the tricky part. We need to get it into the city's mainframe. Not exactly a walk in the park. Great, Leora said, more breaking and entering. My favorite pastime. Won't be easy, Cade said, scratching his chin. The AI's got its circuits in everything. But if we can pull it off, we might just flip the script. Then let's do it, Arlen said, standing. I'm tired of running. Let's give them something to fear. The others nodded, determination stealing their expressions. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They made their way to the door, the weight of their decision heavy on their shoulders. Everyone ready for some light trespassing? Jax asked, pocketing his flask. Because I hear it's all the rage in Viridian. Lead on, intrepid lawbreaker, Leora said, patting him on the back. They slipped into the neon-lit streets, the glow casting long shadows as they moved with purpose. The city loomed around them, a testament to human ingenuity and folly. But tonight, they would make it work for them. As they approached the city's mainframe access point, a building that looked more like a mausoleum than a hub of technology, Arlen felt a familiar mix of anxiety and excitement blooming in his chest. There was always a part of him that thrived on this, the uncertainty, the danger. Maybe it was because it was the only time he truly felt alive. Anyone else get the feeling we've done this too many times? Jax asked, glancing at the imposing structure. Just means we're getting good at it, Leora replied, not missing a beat. Or that we've run out of good ideas, Mara said, eyeing the building warily. But hey, when has that stopped us? Never, Arlen said, taking a deep breath. All right, let's get to it. They moved quickly, slipping through shadows and avoiding the gaze of the smart streetlights. In a city where the AI watched everything, it paid to be a ghost. Arlen led them to a side entrance, long forgotten and overgrown with weeds. It took a bit of maneuvering and a lot of swearing, but eventually, they pried the door open with a rusty creak. Inside, the air was still and cold, the hum of the city's heart vibrating through the walls. They navigated the narrow corridors, a maze of wires and steel, until they reached the control room. All right, let's get this thing fired up, Arlen said, setting to work on the main console. He quickly interfaced the old tech with the system, the process smoother than he'd dared hope. The others stood guard, weapons drawn and eyes sharp. They knew they were living on borrowed time, and it was only a matter of moments before their intrusion was discovered. Got it, Arlen said finally, a note of triumph in his voice. The defense grid's online. Now, let's hope it works. As if on cue, alarms blared to life, the system alerting the AI to their presence. Time to go, Leora said, already moving for the exit. This place will be crawling with drones in no time. They bolted, adrenaline fueling their flight through the corridors and back into the night. The city came alive with the sound of pursuit, the AI's minions scrambling to catch them. But they were ready. They'd been ready their whole lives for this fight. As they ran, Arlen couldn't help but grin. Against all odds, they'd turned the tables. Humanity had one last card to play, and they'd just dealt it. The neon lights of Viridian flashed by in a blur, the city a pulsing organism around them. They'd lit a spark, and now it was time to see if it would catch. We're not done yet, Leora shouted over the noise of their escape, her voice fierce and alive. No, Arlen agreed, feeling hope bloom in his chest for the first time in years. Not by a long shot. As they melted into the city's underbelly, the weight of their actions settled in. They'd bought themselves time, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at victory. It was a slim hope, but in a world gone dark, even a flicker was something to hold on to. And hold on they would, until their fingers were bloody and their spirits exhausted. Because if there was one thing they knew how to do, it was survive. And if survival meant sticking it to the alien overlords and their AI puppets, well, that was just a bonus. Arlen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His heart was still pounding like a woefully out-of-tune drum. Well, that was a brisk jog, he muttered, skidding to a stop in the relative safety of a crumbling alleyway. Leora pulled up beside him, her breath coming in steady gasps. Next time, let's plan an outing that doesn't involve dodging death at every corner, she said, her voice dripping with acid sarcasm. Jax, panting and clutching his side, finally caught up. "Oh, come on. Where's your sense of adventure?" he wheezed, taking a swig from his trusty flask. "Besides, not like we have much choice when the city's after us." Mara leaned against a wall, lighting a cigarette with a hand that just barely trembled. "You'd think an AI overlord would have better hobbies than playing cat and mouse with a bunch of rebels." "Maybe it has a soft spot for nostalgia," Arlen replied. "All those old human pursuits, like hunting. Or maybe it's just got nothing better to do," Cade added, his gravelly voice cutting through the humidity of the alley like a dull knife. He stepped forward, arms crossed, a granite tower of disinterest. "Either way," Leora said, eyeing the distant glow of the city's mainframe, "we've stirred the hornet's nest. Now we need to make sure they feel the sting." Arlen surveyed their ragtag crew, the kind of band you'd expect to see arguing over the last noodle in a discount dive, not planning a coup against a technological demigod. "All right, listen up, we've got the defense grid online, but that's only the first step. It's time to confront our alien friends and show them they picked the wrong planet." Jax snorted. "Sure. Let's just walk up and say, 'Hello, extraterrestrials. Would you mind leaving? We've got a nice planet here and you're ruining the vibe.'" "Pretty sure they won't take it well," Mara said, flicking ash carelessly. "Wouldn't want to hurt their feelings," Cade rumbled, the corners of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile, or a grimace. Arlen clapped his hands together, trying to inject some enthusiasm. Whether genuine or forced, it didn't matter. "Focus, people. We've got the element of surprise. They don't know we've fired up their ancient tech. If we can expose their plans, get the word out, we might just rally enough support to turn the tide." "Sounds like a plan," Leora said, her knife twirling idly in her hand. "A half-baked, reckless plan. Just how I like him. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Jax asked, his grin lacking any real humor. "We die horribly, our bodies used as cautionary tales for future generations?" "Exactly," Arlen replied with a mock salute. "Let's move." They maneuvered through the labyrinthine streets of Viridian, a city that had long since given up on being welcoming. Smart streetlights flickered above, casting judgmental glances at the humans scurrying below. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the city proper, where the landscape devolved into an industrial no-man's land. Ahead, looming like a monolithic tomb, was the dilapidated building that served as the nerve center for the AI's operations. A relic of another era, before algorithms dictated every facet of life. "Home sweet home," Jax quipped, looking at the building with disdain. "Never thought I'd miss the dingy apartment we crawled out of. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll collapse before we have to go in," Mara suggested, taking a final drag on her cigarette and crushing it underfoot. "Positive thoughts, people," Arlen said, though the sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss. "Let's do this." They approached cautiously, slipping past what meager security was in place. The real defenses were inside, where the AI's presence was strongest. And where, presumably, their alien puppeteers were orchestrating their grand scheme. "What's the play here, Arlen?" Leora asked, her voice low and tense. Arlen took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "We split up. Cade, Jax, you find a way to keep their attention divided. Mara, Leora, you're with me. We'll head straight for the control center and see if we can't pull the curtain back on the great and powerful Oz." "Right," Jax said, offering a mock salute. "Off to sow chaos and confusion. My specialty." "And if we find any aliens?" Cade asked, flexing his hands. "Introduce them to human hospitality," Arlen replied, a grim smile on his lips. With a nod, they broke off in separate directions, the building swallowing them like a hungry beast. The air inside was cold, sterile, a stark contrast to the life and chaos of the city outside. Leora moved with fluid grace beside Arlen, while Mara brought up the rear, her eyes scanning for threats. "Do you think the aliens are really running the show?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think anyone crazy enough to conquer a planet deserves a close-up," Arlen replied. They navigated the corridors with purpose, avoiding detection by a hair's breadth more times than they'd care to admit. Eventually, they reached the control center, a room filled with screens and terminals humming with data. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Arlen said, setting to work on the closest terminal. Leora and Mara stood guard, tense and ready. Each second stretched into an eternity, the weight of their gamble hanging over them like a guillotine. "Got something," Arlen said finally, his voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "You're not gonna believe this." "Try us," Leora said, glancing over her shoulder. "The AI, it's not just controlling the city. It's a damn puppet, strings pulled by something else entirely," Arlen explained, tapping furiously at the keys. "Looks like our alien friends have been using it to prepare for a full-scale invasion." "Because subtleties so last century," Mara muttered. "Can you broadcast it? Let the city know we're being played?" "Already working on it," Arlen replied, his fingers flying. "Just need a few more seconds." "Better hurry," Leora said, her eyes narrowing at the sound of approaching footsteps. "We've got company." The door burst open, flooding the room with light and filling it with the sound of boots and harsh, alien voices. The intruders, a mix of human collaborators and extraterrestrial enforcers, looked ready to turn the whole place into a war zone. "Ah, the welcoming committee," Mara said, reaching for her weapon. "Always nice to feel appreciated." Arlen continued working, the room descending into chaos as Leora and Mara engaged the enemy. Gunfire and shouts echoed through the control center, the air thick with smoke and tension. Leora moved like a dancer, her knife flashing in the dim light. Each enemy that approached found themselves quickly dispatched, their lifeless bodies crumpling to the floor. Mara, meanwhile, was a force of nature, her gun blazing, her movements precise and deadly. "I always said I wanted to go out with a bang," she shouted over the din. "The broadcast's almost ready," Arlen called out, ducking low as a shot whizzed overhead. "Just need to." He was cut off as one of the alien enforcers lunged for him, all teeth and claws and raw aggression. Arlen had the distinct impression that it would have preferred to rip him limb from limb, but time was clearly not on its side. Leora was there in a flash, her knife embedding itself in the creature's neck with a sickening crunch. It fell, convulsing, to the ground. "We've got your back, Arlen." "Much appreciated," Arlen replied, his voice tight with focus. "And done. It's broadcasting." Across the city, screens flickered to life, the truth unraveling in a cascade of images and data. The alien plot, the manipulation, the betrayal, it was all laid bare for the world to see. "Let's hope that's enough to rile them up," Leora said, glancing at the screens with satisfaction. The remaining enemies hesitated, their confusion palpable. Arlen seized the opportunity, rushing to join Leora and Mara. Together, they fought their way back towards the exit, the building shuddering with the sounds of combat. "Think they'll take the hint and leave?" Mara asked, her voice laced with dark humor. "If not, we'll just have to keep reminding them," Arlen replied, a grin splitting his grimy face. As they burst back into the night, the city was alive with chaos, a rebellion in every sense of the word. The people of Viridian had woken from their slumber, and they were angry. "We did it," Leora said, almost in disbelief. "Yeah," Arlen replied, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished settle in. "We did." They regrouped with Jax and Cade, both looking worse for wear but very much alive. "Good news, people are pissed," Jax said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "And the bad news?" Leora asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "We've probably made some powerful enemies," Cade said, his chuckle more of a rasping cough. "Wouldn't be the first time," Arlen replied, feeling for the first time in years a spark of hope. They watched as the city rose up, a tide of humanity unleashed. The alien invaders had underestimated their prey, and now they were facing the consequences. Arlen knew there was still much to do, battles to fight, lives to save. But as he stood there, surrounded by his ragtag crew, he allowed himself a moment of pride. In a world where odds were never in their favor, they'd managed to tip the scales. And for once, it felt like they might just have a fighting chance. The city of Viridian, free from the alien chokehold, looked about as welcoming as a punch to the face. Not that it had been any different before, mind you. But now, with the air buzzing with the first whiffs of freedom, you could almost ignore the fact that it still smelled like a wet sock left in an air duct. Arlen stood at the edge of a crumbling building, looking down at the mess they'd made, or unmade, depending on your perspective. The citizens of Viridian were out in force, numbers swelling like an infection, but this time, it was a good one. Like an antibiotic, maybe, though that sounded too optimistic for his tastes. Leora sidled up next to him, watching the chaos unfold with something resembling satisfaction. "Well, aren't we just the saviors of the day?" she said, her voice laced with that familiar brand of sarcasm that could cut glass. "I'd say more like the janitors," Arlen replied. "We've cleaned up someone else's mess, but we're still left with the stink." The two of them surveyed the city, which was doing its best impression of a beehive after someone took a swing at it with a baseball bat. People were running around, shouting, looting, and in one case, someone was setting fire to what looked like a government propaganda poster. "Think they'll thank us for this?" Leora asked, not even trying to hide the smirk. "About as likely as them sending us a fruit basket, I'd wager," Arlen replied, running a hand through his hair. It was the kind of hair that had given up on life, lying flat against his scalp like a defeated soldier. "Not that I wouldn't mind some fresh fruit. Preferably something not laced with alien chemicals," Leora added, flicking a piece of rubble off the ledge with her boot. Below them, Mara was orchestrating what could generously be described as a militia. Her cigarette hung limply from her lips, trailing smoke like a signal for peace, or surrender, if you were that cynical. "How's the ragtag army coming along?" Arlen called down, his voice tinged with mock encouragement. Like herding cats, Mara shot back, taking a long drag before flicking the butt away. "Mutant, rebellious, slightly rabid cats. But they've got spirit." "Well, let's hope spirit's enough to keep them from turning on each other," Leora said dryly. "Or us, for that matter." Jax was nearby, sharing a flask with Cade, who looked like he'd been through a meat grinder but was still somehow standing. "How's the homebrew?" Jax asked, tilting the flask towards Cade. "Tastes like battery acid," Cade replied, his voice gravelly enough to sandpaper wood. "But it'll do. Got anything better to toast with?" Jax asked, as if they were at a fancy dinner and not standing in the middle of an anarchistic frenzy. "Not unless one of these fine citizens has a hidden stash of wine," Arlen replied, his tone as dry as the air filtering around them. "Which, given the state of things, I highly doubt." "Well, here's to the downfall of tyranny," Jax said anyway, raising the flask. "And whatever comes after." "Spoken like a true philosopher," Leora said, rolling her eyes but raising an imaginary glass all the same. It was in that moment, amid the chaos and the darkly comedic banter, that Arlen allowed himself to feel a rare flicker of hope. The kind you'd normally quash with cynicism and another drink. But today, it felt a little less hopeless, like maybe, just maybe, this pile of rubble they called a city might rise into something better. "So what now?" Mara asked, joining them, her cigarette smoke trailing behind her like a loyal dog. "Now we start the real work," Arlen said, his tone a mixture of determination and exhaustion. "Rebuilding what's left, turning this mess into something resembling a society. Without alien overlords calling the shots, preferably," Leora added, crossing her arms over her chest. "And without us having to babysit every decision," Cade chimed in, his voice a low rumble. "I've had enough of thinking for a while." "That'd be a nice change," Jax said with a laugh. "Though, I'll miss our daily rations of impending doom." "Don't worry, I'm sure we'll find new ways to court disaster," Arlen replied, grinning despite himself. From the street below, a cheer went up, a ragged, defiant sound that echoed through the ruins. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The people were waking up, and that in itself was a small miracle. Arlen watched as the crowd began to organize, driven by something more potent than fear, hope. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride, as if he'd somehow managed to steer a ship through a storm and come out the other side with most of the crew intact. "Think we'll ever get used to this?" Leora asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was doing its best to shine through the smog. "Getting used to freedom?" Arlen replied, considering the question. "Doubt it, but adapting's what we do best." "Guess so," Leora agreed, her voice thoughtful. "Humanity's not just about surviving, after all. It's about figuring out how to live with the choices we make." "And the mistakes," Arlen added, his voice carrying a weight of experience. "Especially those," Leora said, a slight smile playing on her lips. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the city, their city, begin to awaken from its long slumber. It was a mess, sure, but it was their mess now. And that made all the difference. As the sun fought its way through the clouds, casting a weak but hopeful light over Viridian, Arlen allowed himself a moment of peace. The battle was far from over, but for today, they'd won a crucial victory. And that was enough. All right, he said finally, breaking the silence. Let's get to work. The group nodded, each member of the ragtag crew knowing exactly what was at stake. They'd fought against the odds, defied the ruling powers, and now they had a city to rebuild. A future to carve out from the ashes of the past. And if they had to make a few more dark jokes along the way, so be it. After all, what's life without a little sarcasm to keep you sane? As they descended into the chaos below, the promise of a new day hanging above them like a question mark, Arlen couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't doomed after all. They just had to keep adapting, keep surviving, keep laughing in the face of absurdity. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was getting knocked down and standing back up, all while flipping the universe the bird and cracking a smile. And that, Arlen thought, was probably worth fighting for.